Hello everyone and welcome to the Property Podcast. It's Rob B here. And this week we're looking at bridging finance. So, I looked long and hard to find an expert to bring on the show to help me with it. He's coming up after the intro.
Oh, I almost don't want to speak now because it's just going to be a disappointment. Yeah, it's me, Rob D, here in the capacity of guest expert and here as usual. So sorry if you were expecting someone more glamorous. But yeah, today we are going to be talking about bridging finance. It's something that I've been involved in heavily for the last couple of years. And something that there's a lot of fear and a lot of misinformation about. So that is what we're going to put right in the next half hour or so.
Okay, so I didn't look long and hard, but you certainly know your subject, Rob, so I'm glad it's you. And it makes it a bit easier because it won't be awkward because, if it was anyone else, I don't know them and I've got to do all that chitty chat before, so it's all good.
All right, well, in case anyone is feeling disappointed that it's only just me and not a glamorous guest, maybe we can make it up to them by offering them a job, say?
Yeah, that's always a fair compromise. So Yellow Lettings is hiring. When aren't we hiring these days? But it's an important role, so we wanted to mention it on the podcast. It is for a London rep. So Yellow Lettings covers many areas across the UK, and we are desperate to get into London, and we know you are too. We get emailed every week, multiple times a week, about when are you coming to London? And we've kind of given a few false dawns around this already. Yes, we're in London. Yes, we're in London. But for different reasons, we haven't been quite there. But now we are. And this is the final piece in the jigsaw. So we want you. We want you to come and work with us for 25 hours a week. So, Rob, we're an awesome company, we like to think, with an awesome team. So we're looking for an awesome person. But let's give everyone a little idea of who we're looking for.
Yeah, so I think this could be suitable for a few different types of person. So maybe you're looking for your first break into getting a property job. So it might be that you're looking for a career change or you're looking for your first job of any kind. So maybe you're just looking for your break and this could be it. Maybe you're a full-time landlord. You manage your own properties. You're very used to doing that, but it's not keeping you busy enough. You're too good. You need to be kept more busy. Well, this could be for you as well. Maybe you're someone who's retired, but you've retired a little bit too early and you've done enough pottering in the shed and now you want to get out there and do some interesting things and meet some interesting people. Or maybe you are none of these people, but you know somebody who fits one of these descriptions. If that's the case, we would really like to hear from you.
We would. You can go to yellowlettings.net/London. That's yellowlettings.net/London and go there if it's you or if it's someone you know, send them there. And of course, it's meetups tonight, Rob. You're in Stratford, I'm in Richmond, so we'll be on the lookout. But as many of you will be at meetups tonight, if you meet anyone who seems to fit that description, make sure you send them to yellowlettings.net/London because we'd love to hear from either you or them and we can speak to you further. So yeah, that's an exciting new role that's been created. Almost though eclipsed by, Rob, an exciting news story, which I promise we won't do this every week, everyone, proves us right again. So this week's news story is North-South house price divide too narrow this year as cost of Manchester homes grows faster than London. And yes, dear listeners, we said this would happen. And the final figures are in, because remember there's a lag on the data. The final figures are in for 2016. And Manchester grew pretty much 9% last year, 8.9%. And London as a whole grew 7.3%. And other cities we earmarked for you to keep an eye on. Liverpool, 7%, just behind London, pretty much the same. I expect that to possibly beat it this year. In 2017, doing very well. Leeds at 5% growth. So lots of places we've mentioned and said to look out for, doing very well indeed. Keep a lookout for the news story link in our show notes, which this week is thepropertyhub.net/bridging. But we promise next week to do something a little bit different that keeps proving us right. We will bring some variety to our news stories, but it was very pleasing to read.
And it's a point that's worth emphasising as well, I think, because there is still this pervading belief that you will get the highest capital growth in the southeast. Okay, I'm accepting a lower yield, but I really want to make it work because the capital growth is higher. Just because it's been the case doesn't mean it's always going to be the case. So maybe we'll sneak in one more mention of that at some point just to ram the point home. We'll see.
It's really interesting, actually. I'm having people come to me now at RMP and say, will you take this London stock off me? No, I've not had that for years. I'm saying no, but it's interesting it's happening. And they're offering, money off prices they've sold at very recently. So it's really interesting. I think, I'm not going to be surprised if our predictions come true this year. We've gone a little bit early in past years, but I think this is the year where we're finally proven right on what we believe will happen in the future trends of the UK property market. But that's that, and this is now. And now is our main topic of the week, and of course, it's don't be scared of bridging finance. Bridging finance, Rob? Over to you. I'll go make a cup of tea and tell me when you're done.
Well, yeah, bridging finance is not something I'm scared of. It's something that I've been involved with lending my own money on a bridging basis for over 2 years. And I like it because it gives me a return that's a high return. It's fixed and it's secured against property. So it's something that I'm a fan of from a lending point of view. And then within the last year, I've formalized that into a company called LendSwift, which allows a few other people to invest as well. So a bit like Rob B does with RMP, really. It allows me to put my money where my mouth is and allow other people to come in on it if they believe it as well. So I'll look at everything that comes through, I'll turn most of it down, and I'll put my own money into stuff that I believe in. So in the process of doing this, I've learned a lot about the bridging sector, which is handy for this episode. But I've also learnt that a lot of property investors are scared of using bridging finance. A lot of people will sort of hear the word bridging and then sort of instantly turn off or believe that it's not for them, or they'll want to use it because they recognize they've heard that it's a useful tool, but they'll have a poor understanding of what it actually involves. So whenever there's fear, the reason for that fear is often a lack of knowledge. And that lack of knowledge is something that we can put straight for you right now. So we'll get into the details, but let's start with the absolute basics. So you might have introduced me as the expert, Rob, but I know that you, at the very, very least, know the basics. So let's start by talking about what bridging finance is.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, I do. The basics. Well, what is bridging finance? It's a short-term loan. It's a short-term mortgage. It's probably the best way of thinking about it. Normally, the term will last anywhere from 1 month to 12 months. And that's because the interest rate's a bit longer. You wouldn't want a lifetime bridging mortgage or loan. The rate is often in the range of 8 to 15%, whereas mortgages, you're a lot less than that. It's 3 to 6%, depending on if you're going through an individual mortgage or through a company. But it's much quicker to arrange. So an individual buy-to-let mortgage is 4 to 6 weeks. A company mortgage is 6 to 8 weeks, and that's if everything goes quickly. Bridging can be weeks, but I don't mean several. I mean literally a few weeks. So it goes a lot quicker. Lenders are also, you'll be pleased to know, a lot less picky on what they'll lend on, which we know can be a challenge with the mainstream lenders sometimes. And in other respects, it's the same. The lenders take a charge over the property, meaning they can repossess it if you don't pay back on time. Very, very similar setup. It's just really designed for people who want to get in and out in shorter spaces of time and are happy to pay a slight premium for it.
Yep, exactly that. So that's what it is. I think a short-term mortgage is the best way of describing it. It's a bit of a contradiction because a mortgage, of course, is for the long term, but it is so similar, except in duration, yes, and in rate, that it's the best way of understanding exactly what it is. So it's similar to a mortgage in many respects. Is it similar in how much you can borrow?
Yes and no. So yes, in terms of you can borrow up to 70% of the property's value, just like a mortgage. So that would be the same. A mortgage, you can get 80%, 75% is probably the main benchmark. But where it gets different and interesting is sometimes you can borrow against the value of the property, not the purchase price. Okay, that's key, the value, not the purchase price. So if you're buying BMV, then you don't have to put as much money in. And that's where it gets really interesting. So, and getting BMV, we've talked about a lot, and it's easier said than done, but it is certainly possible. We achieve it. And sometimes you can borrow against postworks as well of the value of the property. So the gross development value, or sometimes referred to as GDV. So you know exactly what it's going to be worth in the future to cover some of your refurb costs too. So there's some more interesting products out there as well. So you got like the standard where you just loan against the value of the property, but there's some interesting ways you can attack it, and that makes it interesting for a lot of people and people who are doing certain things in particular.
Yeah, so let's run through the main cases for using bridging finance. So probably the most familiar one will be for flips. So if you want to flip a property, you buy it, you quickly increase its value, and then you sell it on again within a matter of months. You can only be using cash or bridging. We've talked about this before. You shouldn't be using a mortgage because mortgage lenders don't like it. You're taking it out for the long term. If you try and pay it back after a few months, they will be none too pleased. So for flips, bridging is the obvious choice if you don't have or you don't want to tie up the cash to do it all in cash. Another very common scenario is auction purchases. So Rob talked about how long it takes to arrange a normal mortgage. You're probably looking at about 6 weeks if everything's absolutely flying along. In an auction, you'll normally need to complete in 28 days or less. So you'd have to be very brave to try to get a mortgage through in that time. Therefore, again, the logical thing to do is to either use cash if you've got it and you're happy to commit it, or use bridging otherwise. It's much quicker, so it still won't be a completely stress-free experience, but you'll be far more likely to get it through in time. Then there are more interesting things that you can do. So with bridging, you can buy properties with problems that make them unmortgageable, which you can fix. So if you wanted to buy a property that had no kitchen or no bathroom, so it's an absolute state, somebody tips you off on this off-market property, and you go around there and it's absolutely horrendous, but you go, oh, brilliant, I can really add value to this and put it into my portfolio. Well, if you go for a mortgage, they won't give you one because it needs to be habitable at the point of taking it over. So that's one example of a property that wouldn't be mortgageable. So if you didn't have the cash and you weren't willing to use bridging, you wouldn't be able to buy it. So that's where bridging comes in. Properties with problems, because as Rob said, bridging lenders are less picky about what they'll lend on.
I think that's really interesting, Rob, because what it allows you to do is it puts you in the same position as cash buyers. Effectively, cash buyers can get into interesting opportunities. You've got to find them, but once you've found them, you can take advantage of deals that others can't. Bridging moves you into that same league if you understand what you're doing. So I think that's really interesting. It kind of puts you in a different bracket of deals that you're able to take advantage of that most people think they can't do because they haven't got the cash, but actually if they use the right type of finance product, they can.
Yeah, that's spot on. And it will cost you. So if you've got piles and piles and piles of cash sitting around, so you're a true cash buyer in that sense, that's always going to be better because you're not having to pay the fees and the interest. And so it costs you. But if you can get a really great deal and buy something you wouldn't otherwise be able to, then yes, you do become a cash buyer and it's well worth doing. Another scenario that's common with bridging is buying properties which you want to refurb to increase its value and then refinance it for the higher value. So if you find a property, you add some value to it, but you bought it on a mortgage, then you'll have to wait a couple of years probably until the end of a fixed term when there won't be any penalties to be able to refinance and realize that higher value. If you buy with bridging rather than a mortgage, then you can take out your mortgage after owning it for about 6 months. So you can realize that increase in value far quicker, get your money out and do it all again. Again, that's very, very common use for it. Then there's just the situation where you can get a great deal by buying quickly. So maybe none of these situations apply. Maybe you're buying a property that doesn't need anything doing to it whatsoever. But for some reason, they just need to sell really, really quickly. And if you can buy it quickly, you'll get a great deal. There wouldn't be time to arrange a mortgage. Therefore, again, if you don't have cash, then there's bridging. Of course, the deal would need to be great enough that it more than offsets the costs that you'll incur by using the bridging. And then there's the fancy stuff. So Rob's already touched on this, but there's lots of interesting things that you can do as a result of bridging lenders being a little bit more adventurous. And one thing that people do, which is quite cool, is doing things like bridging against a property you already own. So if you've got a property that has got no mortgage on it, or it's got a very low mortgage on it, you can often borrow against that property to buy a new one. That often allows you to borrow more. So say that you've got £300,000 worth of equity in a property that you already own. Well, that would allow you to buy a property for £100,000 and spend £50,000 on the refurb and still have plenty left over to spare. Whereas if you were bridging against the property that you were buying, you'd only be able to borrow a percentage of that 150k that you needed. So that's a way to use a property that you already own to mean that you don't have to put any of your own cash at all into a project. So there's lots of cool stuff you can do. Most of it comes down to speed and flexibility. They're the real advantages. There's all situations where you can profit by doing something quickly or doing something creatively that most other people can't do. So there are lots of great uses for it. But of course, it's not a cure-all. There are some situations when you definitely should not be using bridging.
Of course, it's clear, it sounds exciting. If you've not heard it before, this is a new tool I can use for pretty much everything. It's not for everything. The key word is it's like a tool in your finance toolbox. It's just one of many. So there are certain situations where you should just avoid it. If you're not sure on your exit, then you can't bridge forever. Well, you certainly wouldn't want to. So that's definitely not a deal where you bring bridging into the equation. Anything where the gains aren't high enough, Rob's touched on that a few times, the gains have to be there. The reward has to be there to compensate the fees. So you may save £5,000 by buying quickly, but if the bridging's going to cost you £7,000, then it's just not worth it. And, if it's your first project or even your second, if you have the choice, you might make mistakes. So possibly look at another avenue if you can, if it's the first or second project, because your inexperience might punish you. And obviously the risk is higher if you've got higher rates to pay back. So if you're a newbie to refurbs or auctions, be careful. It's not a tool that you should necessarily run to if you're a newbie. I'm not saying definitely don't, but I wouldn't just rush into it. You really have to weigh it up and probably bring in advice from people who are more experienced than you to guide you through it if you want to take it on. But yeah, just be cautious if you're a newbie. But certainly if you don't know your exit or the compensation isn't high enough for the deal, then it's one to avoid. Because, Rob, the costs we've touched on, but they are different to a normal mortgage.
Yeah, it's expensive money. And when I tell you how much it'll cost, you're probably going to fall off your chair and go, well, why do I ever want to use that? But I'll then give you a case study that shows why you might want to use that. So it will cost you. So typical interest rates for bridging are in the range of 8 to 15% per year. So you're looking at least double what you'd be paying on your long-term mortgage. Now, that's okay because this is only for a short period of time. If you were stuck on that rate forever, you would be very unhappy and you'd very much struggle to make any kind of deal work. But you're only using it for a short period of time. That's why you need to be very clear about your exit and make sure it doesn't go on for longer than you expect it to. On top of that, you pay fees. So just like with a mortgage, you will pay an arrangement fee, an evaluation fee, and all manner of other fees, some of which you pay up front, some of which are added to the loan. The same is the case for bridging. You'll be paying around about 2 to 3% of the borrowed amount in fees, I would say. So that's going to be higher again than your average mortgage, and it's over a short space of time, so those fees can seem a bit painful. So interest around 8 to 15%, fees around about 3%, plus you've got all your usual legal and valuation costs as well. And these fees can all be structured in various different ways. So we've talked about the flexibility of bridging. There are lots of different products out there, lots of different ways of doing it. So for example, instead of paying the interest monthly, like you'll be used to doing with your mortgage, if you're not going to have the cash flow and the ability to do that because you're not going to realize your gain till the end, then you can either deduct all that interest at the start, or you can sometimes, if there's enough profit in the deal, save it all up and pay all that interest at the end. So it eases your cash flow throughout the project. So there are lots of different ways of doing it. Okay, I said I'd give you a little bit of a case study. And this is one that we had in the magazine quite a few issues back now. It's a really good case study. It's quite an extreme one, but it serves to illustrate a point quite nicely of why, even though this money is expensive, it might be worth your while. So this was a case of a property that was worth £100,000. And this investor managed to buy it for £63,000. So that's BMV for you. So it was worth 100,000 genuinely. That was the actual survey value. He managed to get it for £63,000. I forget the details, but I think it might have been a deceased estate and the people who inherited just wanted to get rid quickly. So not the kind of deal you're going to trip over every day. You're not going to find this by going on Rightmove for a few minutes, but this is a genuine case study, so it is sometimes possible. Now, if you remember, Rob said right back at the start that one of the things about bridging is you can sometimes borrow based on the value rather than based on your purchase price. So with a mortgage, you're never ever able to do this. They will always value it at the lower of its value or what you paid. With bridging, that's not necessarily the case. So on this, he managed to get a bridging loan for £60,000 because that was based on the value of £100,000 rather than the purchase price of £63,000. So he's only having to put in £3,000 of his own money towards the purchase, which is pretty amazing, really. You're buying a house for £3,000 down. The really amazing bit actually happened 14 days later when he sold the property at auction for £118,000, which is frankly ludicrous. As I said, this is not the kind of thing that's going to happen to you every day. This is probably a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing, but it can be done. The numbers are extreme, but it illustrates a point that can apply even when you're not doing deals quite as good as this one. So the cost of borrowing that money, that £60,000 for 14 days, was £3,556. And that sounds really expensive. You're borrowing that money for 2 weeks and it costs you £3,500. So if you're looking at just that, you go, oh, well, why on earth would I want to do that? Well, the reason is that the profit that he made from this deal was £51,000. So if he had the cash and had loads of cash and was willing to commit it, he could have saved £3,500 and not used bridging at all. But as he didn't, he wanted to conserve his cash for other opportunities. He was able to use that, pay the cost of £3,500, which is nothing compared to his profit of 51. So I like that case study because it illustrates the power of bridging and some of the useful things that you can use it for, the characteristics that make it really handy. And it also illustrates why you might want to do it. So if you decided to just buy cash because you wanted to save £1, and then another deal like this came along next week and you couldn't do it because you didn't have the cash, you'd probably wish that you just paid for the bridging. So in summary, yep, it's expensive, but sometimes it's worth it. And the key is knowing whether for any given deal it's worth it or not.
Yeah, that is a credible deal. And as Rob points out, you're not going to get one of these every week or every month or even every year. But the point there stands. But even if you halved all those numbers in terms of profit levels and all the rest of it, it still would work. And that's the point. Please don't come and ask me for 40% below market value deals. I've not seen one in over 10 years. But even if that was 20% below market value, it still would have worked. So the point stands, even though it's, as Rob said, an extreme example, it's still a real one, and the numbers still work even at not extreme levels. So what do lenders look for? Well, obviously, they're looking for short-term risks because it's short-term lending. So complete opposite to a mortgage. You'll be possibly pleased to hear that they're more interested in the property than you. And this is because if the security goes wrong, they'll know that the property is worth enough to cover their debt because they've already done a valuation, and that's all that matters. They'll want to be confident in your ability to complete the project and, of course, pay them back, but they're not as fussy on how much income you have. And even sometimes bad credit is okay. So for people who have experience in refurbs, or you can just give the confidence to the lender that you're going to be able to see this project through, whatever it may be, they're going to be comfortable lending to you if the deal is strong enough. It's not so much about you, which is, kind of how lending should be.
Yeah, and as a lender, I understand this because if you're giving a mortgage, you're giving somebody money for 25 years. You want to know that they have a solid income. So whatever happens over 25 years, and a lot can happen, that they'll still be able to pay you back. And that's why they're looking at the amount of rental income that the property produces, and they're looking at the amount of money that you've got just in case you need to chip in. Still a bit daft if you ask me, because you could check someone's got a job and then they'd lose their job tomorrow, but you can see where they're going with it. But when you're lending for just 6 or 12 months, then that's not a factor anymore. You just want to know, my money is secured against this property, so what is this property worth? That's really all that matters. Okay, so let's move towards wrapping this up. We've talked about some of the situations when bridging is great. We've talked about some of the risk. We've talked about some of the situations when you shouldn't use it. Let's try and put some of this into some golden rules. So golden rules of bridging. So first rule, Make sure that your bridging term is long enough to give you time for what you want to do and to arrange your exit. So you might want to try and keep the terms of the bridging loan as short as you possibly can because it will save you money. But if you run over your term, it starts to get even more expensive and you get into the realms of penalty interest and all sorts. So make sure you give yourself a bit of breathing space. If you think, for example, I can get the refurb done in a month and I'll have it sold in 2 months. So, well, okay, but what if it takes you longer to get the sale through? What if something happens? Give yourself plenty of time. And the same applies if you're refinancing as well. Second golden rule, always have a plan B. Because again, you don't want to get stuck on this expensive type of financing. So if you can't sell, for example, so that was your plan, you wanted to sell, but now time is ticking on and you're just not getting any bites, can you refinance and add it to your portfolio instead? Make sure at the start that you're able to do that. Or flip it. If you're planning to refinance, but for some reason you're unable to, can you sell it instead? Always have a plan B. Third golden rule, if you're planning to exit by refinancing, make sure that you will be able to refinance and do that by speaking to a broker first. So this is where you can fall foul of something that we talked about earlier. Bridging lenders aren't so picky about your income, your situation, and so on. That's great. But if you then try to refinance, you'll be going with a long-term lender who will be fussy about all those things. So you don't want to get to that point and then they'll go, oh, actually, we're not able to lend to you. So speak to a broker first and make sure that that refinance exit is there if you need it. And finally, fourth golden rule, if your first plan of exit is selling, make sure that you can still break even if you have to drop the price for a quick sale to pay your bridging facility back. So, of course, you've got your dream price that you want to sell it for, but if it's taking too long, you need to drop it right down. Can you still cover your costs? So basically, in a worst case scenario, will you at least break even? Best case scenario, you'll make money. So those are 4 golden rules. If you obey those, you shouldn't get into any trouble. But Rob, as we mentioned at the start, people are scared of bridging. Why are they scared of bridging? And what's a different way of reframing it to remove that fear?
It's just understanding it. And I think this is the whole point of this episode is understanding what it is and what it isn't. People think it's expensive, which compared to a normal mortgage and a normal buy-to-let, it is. But if there's an opportunity to make money, then it's cheap. And that's what it's about. It's about assessing it against each deal. People look at numbers, and they do this in cash flows. They might go, oh, I don't like service charges, but the ROI might be higher at the bottom than against the house, but they get fixated on a number in the middle of the cash flow. And it's exactly the same here. This is your finance cost in the middle of your cash flow. It doesn't matter if it's big or small. What matters is the number at the bottom. And if that's a big number, then it doesn't matter how much you're paying for the finance. Yes, of course, if you've got cash, then cash is king, go in. But if you haven't got cash, but you still want to do these type of deals that we've talked about, it gives you an option. People also are wary because they think it's risky. And if you know what you're doing, then it's not. That's what it comes down to. It comes down to knowledge. Of course, if you're completely new to property, you've never done it before, and you take on a loan of 15%, you might be at risk. But if you know what you're doing, then you should be fine. And the other thing is, as I said, it's because people don't know what it is. They hear about it, they go, ooh, yeah, sounds exotic. But once you understand it, you can see when it's a really, really effective tool, which hopefully through this episode we fixed. So to find out more, go to lendswift.co.uk/borrow, that's Rob's company, and check out the calculators they've got there, really cool, where you can see how much you can borrow and what it would cost you. And I think Rob would say, of course, shop around and all that. But the main thing is you can just play around with it first and get an idea. And if you're looking at these types of deals, then you can see if it works for you and then possibly approach LendSwift. But the main thing is now you've been armed with the knowledge to be able to make those decisions. And this is key. Trust alone is going to leave you vulnerable. If you invest with trust because you go, it's the same with R&P as well. I trust Rob B or I trust Rob D, so I'll work with him. Trust alone leaves you vulnerable. But when you've got trust and education, it's a powerful combination. You want to trust the people you work with, but you also want to be empowered with the education. And that puts you in a really strong position. So that's what, you've now got. You've got that education. And of course, you can bypass all our companies and do it other places as well. You're not tied to us. You can shop around to your heart's content. But the main thing is, 1, we've got the knowledge over to you, and that's our main aim of the podcast, is you understanding what these subjects are, what they're about, so you've been empowered with the knowledge and the education to go and use it to your benefit. And I hope it has been to your benefit.
Yeah, exactly. And I should emphasize, Rob's already said it, but I should say it again, don't just work with my company because it's my company. If you like the podcast, that's a great reason to consider, but it doesn't mean that you should. Sometimes it will be the best option, sometimes it won't. But we've put these calculators together, so whether you're interested in using us or not, you can go and sort of learn a little bit more by applying some of this, by going and seeing how much you could borrow for a particular deal and what it would cost you. It's often difficult with bridging to work out exactly what it will cost because a lot of lenders are less than transparent. They won't tell you what it will cost without you getting on the phone with them, or there'll be lots of fees that you're not being told about that come to light later. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. And so the way that we've decided to approach things, which hopefully you get the sense of from the podcast, is transparently. So you can go on there and play around. You don't have to hand over any data at all. You can just see what's what.
I hate that when you go on websites and it's like they want your email, your address, your phone number before you can get even close to the tool that they're offering. Yeah. And then you put it in and they'll go, thanks, we'll send you the tool soon, but we're going to call you first. And you're like, exactly. No! Right. Anyway, we've got a great resource of the week coming up. I've really enjoyed this resource, so I'm looking forward to telling you about that. And of course, we'll let you know what's coming up next week. But before that, oh yes, you know what time it is. You're going to hear that round of applause. Because it's Review of the Week. And this week it comes from Myad72, and Myad says, want to make 100k in 14 weeks? Well, this is the wrong podcast for you. Rob and Rob provide a grounded and level-headed look at all aspects of property investment. The focus is on actionable advice to help listeners with their long-term goals. You'll find no secret strategies or pitches for high-cost courses here, just common sense, discussion on guidance and wealth or real-life experience. They work hard to make an enjoyable listen, and it works. Well, thank you, Myad. Thank you very much. It's a great review, and if you'd like to leave us a review, well, you're probably going to get a lot more luck in your life if you do. No, we can't promise that, but we will be happy with you, and I think that's probably good enough.
Yeah, do please leave us a review. You get read out on the show, we get happy, everybody wins. And we say that it's difficult to leave a review on iTunes. It's not that hard. Go over to thepropertyhub.net/podcast and we'll show you how to do it. Okay, so that's nearly the end of the show, but we cannot wrap up an episode of the Property Podcast. It's in our constitution. It is illegal for us to wrap up the Property Podcast without giving you a resource of the week. And this one is a book that you've suggested, Mr. B, which I haven't read. It's been on my wish list ever since it came out. And we were talking about it the other day. You said you've read it and you enjoy it very much. And that book is 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel.
It is. I tackled this one by audiobook through my Audible account, and I've really, really enjoyed it. Great book. I think it's worth explaining who Peter Thiel is to those who don't know. Some people go, of course I know who Peter Thiel is, and that's fine. But some people might not. Peter Thiel is a multi-billionaire. He's certainly worth over $1 billion. So he's a billionaire based in Silicon Valley. He's most famous probably for being part of the PayPal Mafia, which is a group of people who founded PayPal and went on not only to sell that for crazy money, but pretty much all of them went on to start other companies, which the vast majority sold for over £1 billion or are worth over £1 billion today. So an incredible group of people. Some of the other people you may have heard of, Elon Musk, anyone? Rockets and getting to Mars, that guy? Yep, he was one of the same people in the same group. And Peter Thiel is rightly held in a very high regard too. So if he produces any content, I'd like to get my hands on it, and I have. In fact, I'm like you, Rob, I'm almost embarrassed it's taken me this long to get to it because of all the interesting things he's done. Now, this is a guy who isn't short of opinions, a bit like us, Rob. He's not short of an opinion or two. And I don't agree with everything he says in this book, but I do agree with a lot of it. But what I do find fascinating is his thought process to get to his points. He's not just throwing out opinions and then just not backing them up. He's letting you know how he got to these opinions and this thought process. And a lot of it is through his experience, to his credit. But a really, really intelligent guy, you know. I don't think you're going to get many dunces who build billion-pound companies, but a really intelligent guy. And the fact that people like this are putting content together that can only benefit people, you know, there's no upsell to this. It's like, not go to this company of mine or that company of mine. It's just him spreading his knowledge. I think is really credible of him, and something that for those people who are interested in business or just following people who are successful and trying to mimic their habits and get inside their heads and their thought processes, then I highly recommend this book.
Yeah, I don't think Peter Thiel's going to be too interested in upselling you to his weekend course for 197 or whatever it is he? Like, it's just, this guy is a billionaire. He didn't really need to write a book, but he has, and you can access the contents of his brain for about 10 to 15 quid. So it's a heck of a bargain when you look at it in that way. So I will be bumping that up my list. He's a smart guy. I love the Elon Musk book, and I'm sure this one is going to be similarly thought-provoking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Elon Musk book, which we've talked about before, ended up on our top resources of the year in 2015. So check that one out if you're new to the podcast. If you've missed that one, well worth it. And also well worth it is turning up next week for the Property Podcast, because next week we're going to be looking at exit strategies. So we often talk about how to get into property, how to maintain your properties, what to do while you're going through the life of that property. We've done it all, but we haven't really, in any great depth anyway, looked at exit strategies. So this is something that's been requested a few times. So next week, we're going to look at the best exit strategies for property investment. So you've got in, but you want to get out. Well, we're going to tell you exactly how and in the most efficient and profitable ways next week.
Yes, indeed we are. So we will leave you with our thanks for listening. We'll leave you with the reminder that you can get along to a meetup tonight, thepropertyhub.net/meetup. If you're at Richmond or Stratford, we will see you there. And a reminder as well that if you are interested in our Yellow Lettings London rep job, or you know somebody who might be, yellowlettings.net/London is the place to go. Or you can not worry about any of these things that I've just said. If you are driving or running and you can't jot down all these links, there's only one link that you need to remember, which is thepropertyhub.net/bridging. That is the show notes for this week's episode, where all of this will be rounded up. So whether or not you can make it to a meetup tonight, we will see you back here for more Property Podcast next week. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.